Welcome back to Live at 7 Wednesday. This evening we're taking a closer look at homosexual activism and the evolution of the homosexual community in Jamaica. There have been several articles and research documents written about the struggles of Jamaican homosexuals, but oftentimes those headlines screaming about Jamaica's homophobia are usually written by foreigners. However, this evening we hear from a Jamaican about being gay in Jamaica and the various challenges that come with it. Javed Jaghai is our guest this evening. Javed, thank you so much for joining us.
Certainly.
It has to be, though, a difficult decision when you decide as an activist, whether a researcher or whether you promote homosexual rights, to come forward and say, look, I'm not only defending the rights of others, but my rights as well. What made you decide to take that step?
Right. So I've done a lot of research about gay identity in Jamaica, and one of the things you find is that when people talk about gay identity, it's usually as an abstraction. It's this thing, it's this idea, and nobody really claims the experience. And I feel like we take away the power from our stories when we make them abstract. And so I think for my own sake, for my own rights, for my own life, it's so important for me to claim my struggle, to claim my experience, and to use my story to really empower others who are like me, but also challenge prejudices in Jamaica.
Now, we want to get into a research paper that you worked on in terms of it's representing the realities of gay Jamaicans, and you have a look at the identity, community formation, and activism from 1970 to 2012. Mm-hmm. But before we even get into that, this decision that you made, though, you're Jamaican, and so yes, it must have impacted your friends, your family. What has that experience been like? What has the reaction been like?
I've been on quite a journey over the last few years, and luckily for me, I have had very good experiences with my family and friends. I made very careful and deliberate efforts to come out to each of them individually, and I'm very overwhelmed by the fact that my family and my friends support me unconditionally. And that's one of the reasons too I feel like it's important for me to speak, because we have this dominant understanding that Jamaicans are homophobic. And it's true, they very much are. But I think when you come out to Jamaicans and you allow them to see a very personal side of who you are, something that's so personal that you held a secret for so long, Jamaicans appreciate and respect that, and they will respect you.
So you have no fear that having made this declaration, you probably have done it before, but now sitting down to talk about yourself and to talk about some of the issues that you go through in terms of being a member of a particular community, you have no fear about the backlash that you're going to get? Or are you challenging your own thesis, which we're going to get into in a little while, in terms of, because you do agree to some extent that the homosexual community, in fact, make Jamaica look more homophobic than it actually is?
It's a little more complex than that, but
to sum it up nicely.
Yes, I'm fearful. I'm human. I have to recognize that there are potentially negative repercussions to me appearing on TV saying I'm gay. However, I know for a fact that you don't change the world by remaining silent. You don't change the world by being preoccupied by fear. And if it is you're going to really change minds and hearts, you have to go out there, you have to represent your cause, you have to represent it with conviction, and you have to represent it as who you are. And so the only issue I have now is how my family and my friends will be affected by my disclosure, because I recognize that by taking on a public role, that I might be exposing them to scrutiny and harassment. And that hurts me. But at the same time, I think my family and my friends recognize the importance of the work that I'm doing, and they are going to support me no matter what.
And you've taken on this public role with a decision to stay in Jamaica?
Well, I'm in this for the long haul. I love Jamaica. I wouldn't be here if I didn't love Jamaica. And I think that's something people often forget, you know, because when we talk about homosexuals, we talk about them as if they are foreigners. We talk and we say, well, if you don't like it here, you should just leave. But the fact is, we are Jamaicans. We are here. We're not going anywhere. All right, and at some point or another, we're all going to sit down together and have a frank discussion about how we're going to figure out a way to get along.
At what stage did you know that you were not heterosexual?
There's no simple answer to that question, because there's never any one moment. I think throughout my life, there was always the understanding that I didn't fit in, and I couldn't quite articulate what it was that made me feel alienated from Jamaican
society. Yeah, but looking
society.
at you now, how would people know that you don't really fit in? What were some of the things that made you feel like you didn't fit in?
Well, I was very, very effeminate as a child. And in Jamaica, from a very young age, if you don't fit into gender norms, people are going to let you know, and they're going to ridicule you for it. And so there was that, and then I was also very studious. I was very diligent with my studies, and people teased me for that as well. Just on the whole, as I started to mature and I started to question more and question social norms and question given wisdom, I just started drifting away from my peers. So there was this understanding that, okay, I'm not quite normal, but I wasn't sure what it meant. And honestly, it wasn't until I left Jamaica that I was introduced to gay people and introduced to acceptance of gay lifestyles, and that I grew to accept myself.
So you're telling us you never explored in Jamaica any at all that quote-unquote abnormalcy that you experienced?
Well, of course not, because I'm heterosexual.
In Jamaica you are.
Right, and even though my internal disposition is saying otherwise, I had convinced myself that I had to be normal. I wasn't a child molester. I wasn't a predator. I wasn't an abomination. I was a human being. And so I couldn't be all the bad things they said gay people were. And then you go abroad and you meet people who are gay. And the first time I met a gay person, actually, I laughed. I said, who would ever claim such a stigmatized identity? And I thought the person was a fool. And slowly I started to really challenge myself to confront the reality that I too was gay. And I come to Jamaica now and I realize that there are people who didn't leave who arrived at the same conclusions in very different ways. And I think that's a very profound experience as well.
It is, because here you are telling us that, look, I grappled with this as a youngster, and this is how I felt, and I hid it until I went away. So how do we now define gay identity in Jamaica, if you want to put it that way? Because clearly it's a challenge with persons not wanting to claim the identity,
right,
but yet still don't fit into the quote-unquote normal arena of life.
Right. Well, it's a challenge because I promise you, it's a very, I suppose, it's a little known secret that Jamaica has a very vibrant gay community. And so while there are stories of victimhood and stories of suffering, the fact is that I think our lives speak to resilience, speak to an indomitable will to be despite the cultural constraints. And so people find ways.
So you're frightening Jamaicans now, you're telling them that, look, it's not a little bit away.
I'm a little away.
It's more than you think.
No.
And it's all over.
Well, yes, because gay people are everywhere. We're in every family. And we choose to pretend they don't exist because we don't want to confront our prejudices. But the fact is that I'm not the caricatures that Clovis paints in his cartoons in The Observer. I'm not the disease vector that Shirley Richards and Wayne West make me out to be. I'm not the child molester that Betty and Blaine says I could be. You know, I'm a very successful Jamaican who has struggled against lots of odds. My mother's a dressmaker, my father's a security guard, and me work hard in school, and I think I very much have, you know, that quintessential Jamaican story of success that people refuse to see because they're so blinded by concerns about who I love.
So here's an interesting point, because you're not from the quote-unquote upper-class community that easily gets a little more acceptance than those who have to struggle to meet the odds.
Right.
You're from a regular family, and they've accepted you the way that you are.
There have been struggles because I think it's very hard on Jamaican parents especially to reconcile the hatred they think they're supposed to feel based on their socialization and the love that they have for their children. And so every Jamaican parent or sibling or friend really goes through a struggle to make sense of the fact that they have a gay family member or friend.
And we're going to make some more sense about that in terms of talking a little bit more about the identity. And this issue you've come up with about classism within this very homosexual community. You have to hear it. Don't go anywhere. Be right back.
No, I don't think so. We're a little bit more tolerant than they think that we are. If you go into a lot of the inner city communities, you'll find persons who are lesbians and gays, and the community tolerates them. Sometimes they even go as far as to protect them.
We not grow as no man to man and woman to woman. We grow as woman to man, man to woman. That's a free culture. So we don't really respond with them one thing and say.
Not to the fullest extent, as in, you know, some people do accept it, accept such individuals.
Persons on the streets there answering, is Jamaica as homophobic as is portrayed abroad? Let's now see what our friends on Facebook had to say. Okay, just before we do that, well, we'll get to Facebook another time. We still have with me Javed Jaghai, gay advocate, who is telling us not only about his advocacy, but his life, actually, as a homosexual. Javed, thank you so much for staying with us. Now, you're doing a research paper, as we mentioned earlier, and in it you look at the whole issue of classism in the homosexual community. And it's almost your way of trying to explain why certain people see attacks on gays the way they do. Mm-hmm. But you're saying it doesn't happen to everybody, so it's not as dreadful to live in Jamaica as people make it out to be.
Right. The story is definitely more complex than I think most people understand. Even Jamaicans don't quite understand the complexity of the Jamaican gay and lesbian experience. So the fact is that we're a very class-based society, we're a very status-conscious society, and you find those very same dynamics reproduced in the gay community. So because of how homosexuality is demonized in the culture at large, it's seen as a liability. And so if you're going to progress, if you want to be seen as a member of the respectable elite and the upper class, then you have to divorce your personal life, your sexual life, from your public persona. And many people think that's completely reasonable to make that kind of sacrifice because...
Is it a sacrifice though? Because heterosexuals don't walk around declaring I'm heterosexual. So why should it matter? Why should it matter being a public discourse or even being something of public display?
Okay, it's a huge sacrifice. And I can tell you from personal experience that gays and lesbians in Jamaica go to enormous lengths to conceal their sexual identities. And even though this is just a little part of our really complex identities, it becomes a very, very important core identity because of the effort that goes into hiding it. Now, heterosexuals don't need to walk around and say, I am straight, because it's assumed that everyone is straight. So if we don't challenge that discourse, if we don't interrupt that discourse and say, well, look, I'm actually here as well, and I'm not straight, then people will not know, and they will not be sensitive to the needs of people who are not heterosexual. Furthermore, me know straight people when I see them. I see rings on fingers. I see them walking in Emancipation Park hand in hand.
Gay people wear rings now too. They go overseas, get married, and come back.
Perhaps, but the very, very elite, the very, very few, the people who have means, for the majority of people in Jamaica, when you see them in public, they will not be doing or saying anything that's going to implicate them as gay or lesbian. And if you live that life for a day, you recognize just what kind of burden that places on people who are not afforded the opportunity to take granted of the fact that their sexualities are
and
legitimate.
There are some Jamaicans who are watching now who will say, look, that's not true. We have a set of young men in New Kingston who are misbehaving. We have a set who has taken up residence in a residential community who are misbehaving, who don't care to hide the fact or even to show respect or quote-unquote decorum for that. Mm-hmm.
Well, isn't it ironic, though, that the people who you think are most vulnerable are the ones who are most visible? Where are the professional...
No, you explain to us the irony of that, because that's something you touch on in your research paper.
Definitely.
And you actually point to the fact that these are the persons who are more likely to be abused or more likely to be victims of violence.
Right. And I think you just gave us the answer. If you are the one who is most vulnerable to homophobic violence, you might just be the first one to squeal. The rest of us who are in our uptown bubbles are quite content, all right? We know what the situation is. Yes, there are certain sacrifices that must be made, but we deal, all right? There are those people who can't deal because they live in communities where they can't hide who they are and they're not protected by their class positions. And so it so happens that because that's all Jamaicans see, and Jamaicans are all too eager to demonize gay people. So if we see, bad behaving gay people, even though there are bad behaving people in every group, we latch onto that image and say, well, that is gay, even though we know that is not the truth. Because everybody at Jamaica, we tell you, say, me no gay smarty. I know they are ambitious, they're intelligent, they are leaders, but we don't talk about those people.
Because those people probably don't want to be talked about.
No, but it's also a matter of expectations, because we allow people to be resolved in their closets, right? We don't give them a reason to want to come out because we accept them as they are.
Do you think, though, this image that you've portrayed of the persons who have come out is what fuels the international media attention more than the average, the regular, if you can call it that, homophobic community? And how do you resolve that? How do you resolve that in the minds of Jamaicans when there is a set of quote, bad reference, but you people who make us look like demons, and then you ask us for acceptance in return.
Well, the issue is that we need to diversify the narrative. We need to talk more broadly about the diverse experiences that gays and lesbians experience in Jamaica. And I, as an advocate, I challenge the people I work with to recognize how it is they are making things bad for us, because you are telling international people that it's really super bad, and then Jamaicans are getting defensive. And in the same breath, you are telling gay Jamaicans that the situation is so bad that they shouldn't come out. Now, if people do not come out, if you don't tell people who you are denying them the opportunity to exercise tolerance. And I think that's the place where we are at now as a society. Gay people need to take the initiative to tell people about who we are, because they will not learn otherwise.
You don't think we've made any progress since the 1970s? Your research paper looks back at some of the movements that were formed in defense of people's rights, but in terms of progress, have we made any?
I think we've progressed in some ways and we've regressed in others. I think in the 1970s and 80s, you had a much more vocal LGBT lobby that was very much in your face. They were open about who they were, and they were very effective. And I myself, I'm so inspired by men like Larry Chang, who came out publicly and said, look, this is my life, and I think this is what we need to do to learn to respect each other. Since the 1990s, where there was huge international backlash to homophobia in Jamaica through music, and an increasingly aggressive and vocal homophobic Jamaican public, I think advocates have become scared, Jamaicans have become defensive and combative, and in many ways progress has stalled. But in terms of identity, I think we now have more access to information about what it means to be gay through the internet, through American television shows. And so the upcoming generation of Jamaicans have a better understanding of the complexity of gay identity and the legitimacy of gay identity than I think others similarly positioned in the 1970s would have.
As you mentioned music, I have to read this. It's a quote from your thesis. And basically you talk about socializing in particular parties that are geared towards homosexuals. And it says, we gyrated to the music of the same artists that sing forcefully against homosexuality. In fact, anti-gay lyrics were vocalized in a chorus when they sounded across the dance floor. And you go on to say, how ironic, I thought, that foreign gay rights activists go to such great lengths to censor Jamaican artists who have homophobic lyrics in their repertoires. So you're telling us that the homosexual community in Jamaica, to the parties that you have visited, gyrate to the very music that the international community raises concerns about?
Yes. So two things about that. One, we are Jamaicans. We love dancehall music, and when you go to a party, a dancehall music you hear.
Whether it contains homophobic lyrics or not.
But here's the trick now, because if a dancehall artist is singing music, it's usually the most popular artists are men, and they're singing about women. However, when a gay man in Jamaica dances to that, he's dancing with a man. And I think it's absolutely subversive that he's using the very same means that is used to subordinate his identity in the public. He's using that very same means to affirm his identity in a private space that accepts him for who he is. And I think that's absolutely powerful.
Is it?
It is. It's ironic that we're appropriating the very same cultural artifacts used to marginalize us to affirm who we are.
Yeah, but at the same time, you're dealing these artists a bad blow because nobody's standing up for them.
Right, but you can't conflate all Jamaicans, all Jamaican gay people, with the narratives used in advocacy. You can't. The advocacy organizations are few in number, and there are a handful of individuals who lead this advocacy. Jamaican gays and lesbians are living their lives. They're going to school, they're going to work, they're taking care of their families. They're not necessarily involved in the direct framing of advocacy narratives.
It sounds to me then as if you're saying organizations like JFLAG are not doing what they're supposed to do.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
They're missing the mark.
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying they can do more. And they can think more strategically about how to frame messages that foster tolerance in Jamaica, but that also affirm the identities of gay people. And I don't think we've thought so much about the identity piece because we assume it just happens naturally. And that's something I think gay rights organizations in Jamaica need to do. To not assume that people accept themselves, that people understand, the challenges of negotiating identity in a place like Jamaica, and to really focus on the internal dynamics of the community and not so much the external, which is what we've been focusing on almost exclusively.
Interesting. So, in terms of JFLAG, tell us specifics that you think they can do, especially for that class of the society or your community that you think doesn't quite understand how to fit in and how to make it work. The ones who basically expose themselves to the elements?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
The ones in New Kingston, if you want to
Yes.
put it like that.
Yes.
What is J-Flag not doing to help educate and protect them, if it is that they can do more?
But I don't think this is solely a J-Flag issue, and I think that's where we have a problem in Jamaica, because we assume, homosexuality is peripheral to national issues. We assume homosexuals are peripheral to Jamaican families and communities, and so if you need to deal with homosexual issues, it needs to be by a gay rights organization. But this is a social issue that Jamaica needs to grapple with. There are people who are displaced from their communities, displaced from their homes, undereducated, and they have social issues to deal with. And I think collectively, if we recognize this is a problem in Jamaica, then Jamaican organizations need to figure out a way to address that issue.
And that's something, of course, we're going to want to follow up at some time. But Javed, thank you so much for being with us here on Live at 7. We continue after the Supreme Ventures draw.